volunteering to go to graveyards and find gravestones and that. So it's worth remembering that in South Connemara, where it's actually a very, very old area. So there would be very good graveyard records, actually good headstones and that. And some of the church records are very good. So the centre where I work at the moment, I'm employed as a tourism development officer. So that's my day job. But my genealogy activity and that is actually mostly to do with myself, and I do a lot of it on a voluntary basis. So what we put into the centre, we put a conference room in with seating, stage and sound system. We have a good audio-visual room. We have a catering kitchen. We have a dining area. We have an archival room, and we have a relaxation area for when people come basically to meet, if there's local family members or that. And we have now got planning permission, and we have sourced funding to add on an interactive tourism display. You can see the photograph of the centre as it is, and just over to the left, there will be another piece added on. What you can't see from that photograph is the location. It's located right on the sea. And basically, when you look out the window of our cafe, if it was a clear day, as they say, you could see all the way to Portland, Maine. So basically, I'm being told here that my audio has been affected, and that's probably from where I am at the moment. What you're looking at here on screen is St. Macdara's Island, and St. Macdara's is an oratory out on the west coast on a little island named after the saint. And it would have been common enough in those times for people getting away from trouble in Europe and going on with their educational activities and their monastic activities, and they move west onto Macdara's Island. And Macdara's Island holds every year, there's a conference, there's a group, a maritime festival happens every year on the 16th of July, and a flotilla of boats go onwards and outwards to Macdara's Island, where there is a mass said. And that has down through the years been a focal point for people coming home to meet family, and people coming home. It would be like Christmas. In some other areas, people will come home, and that's how they keep in contact with the area. And there's a holy well on the island, and there's a belief that basically people who attend that pilgrimage will not drown. There has been, as I said, down through the generations, immigration and migration had been a way of life in Connemara. And since the early 19th century, people have immigrated both voluntary and as individuals and in family groups and by assisted schemes, and also as convicts and as labourers. And their destinations included England, Scotland and Wales as seasonal workers, construction workers and mill workers. Very often people from the area, they would go to England for a while, maybe marry there, have a family, or sometimes not. And when they had enough money gathered, they would move from there then to the United States. America and Canada saw a lot of Irish and a lot of people from South Connemara going there. And remember that people from South Connemara and Mid Connemara would be native Irish speakers. So oftentimes the jobs that were open to them would be jobs where they took while they learned the English language, jobs that they would have been used to at home in Connemara. So they would have been used to working in the shore, they'd have been used to working on the sea, and they were good labourers, and they were used to working with stone because that would be the main material in the area. They were also involved in mining, and they went to Alaska, to California. A number went to the American Midwest, sheep herding, and that actually went right up until the 1970s. And then, of course, a number of people went into domestic work, and a number of people would have gone into religious orders. And it's interesting there today, from talking about the Mount Bellew orphan girls in Mount Bellew. A number of years ago, I was down at a little conference in Mount Bellew, and it was quite interesting because some of the women from the Connemara area who would have joined the convents and gone into as nuns, they would actually have been part of the religious people in Mount Value, and some of them went from there, especially to the Texas region. The South Connemara and Mid Connemara areas also had some convicts, but especially the Clifton Courthouse, and I'm a native to Clifton, and there's a very interesting book, and it's called A Draft of Derwent Ducks, and that book actually shows where a lot of the women from the British Isles, both Ireland, England, Scotland and Wales, went to, and what their reasons for being sent were. And it's a very good book, and it will cover East and West Galway equally. And of course, the women from Scotland, Wales and the west coast of Ireland didn't speak English, so they were actually housed on boats in the Derwent River until they were trained in housekeeping skills, rudimentary English, and that. They were actually quite well treated. Women were prioritised, they were needed, and they were let out to work in farms and sometimes to marry and that. But if they went to work in a farm, or if they went to work as assisted labourers or whatever, if they weren't treated well, it was quite acceptable that they would be brought back and then found a new place of employment. And we also have some people from South Connemara who would have gone to South America, and in particular Argentina. That may be to do with the other contexts that the west of Ireland has with those areas, but we have had a number of people. Sometimes it's like a form of chain migration. Maybe people went to New York, they've discovered there was something going on in South America, and then went on down to there. But traditionally, people from the Connemara, a lot of them went to Boston, and the main reasons that they went to Boston, as I said, is to do with the language. So the foundation stone for the centre would have been laid by Marty Walsh, who was now the Labour Secretary in the Biden's American government, and he would have been former mayor of Boston, a two-term mayor, and both of his parents would have come from the Carna. Well, his mother's people came from the Russmuck area, which is the next parish over, and his father would have come from the Carna area. And when they went to America, they met and they married in Boston, and Marty Walsh's uncle would have been very active in the unions there. Of course, we have Liam Cosgrave in that previous photograph, whose father would have been the leader of the first independent Irish government, and Liam Cosgrave and his brother Michael were actually sent to Carna, where they spent some months back in 1932 or thereabouts to learn Irish because of the transition into the Free State. So in the centre, we work with people who come looking for their family and who come looking for their descendants, and we follow the traditional methods as used in a lot of other places in Ireland. So we do the traditional methods of people visiting and coming looking themselves into the centre. People write to us, we also get phone calls. I research family history and historical documents myself, and in doing so I sometimes come across maybe very accurate descriptions of, say, maybe somebody had written a letter a number of years back to a family or something, and you can then build up a family history from that. And I have all of that on file. We also operate some websites. We have some very, very good Facebook groups in the area, and Noel Murphy and Peter Mannion and Jim Holleran work together on the Russmuck area genealogy page, which is very, very well done. It very much concentrates on the genealogy of the area, and they move further afield. They also engage themselves in a number of family name projects. For example, Jim Holleran would be very involved in the Holleran DNA. We also have a knee project, and of course the Mannion project, which takes in Dr. Joe Mannion, and that would be, so there's a large population of Mannions, as you know, in East Galway, and of course we also have a very large population of Mannions between Clifton and Russmuck. The Carna Facebook page, of which I work with Terry Fitzgerald, who's an American genealogist, and she's also an ambassador for the Untitled, where I work. Our page has a more social slant, but we do work on the DNA, and we do work on family finding. And Terry would be a very good genealogist, as would Noel Murphy, Jim Holleran, and we have a number of other people that we would work with, such as the Irish Centre in Portland, Maine. In recent years, we have made contacts with the Minnesota Irish group, and in 1878, thereabout, in the second lot of big famines to hit the west coast of Ireland, a number of people would have gone from the Carna, Clifton, Rossmuck, Lettermullen area to Minnesota, as well as people from Achill, Belmullet, and South Mayo. And there are a number of groups working together, tracing back the people who left on those immigrant packages. So there would have been the James Hack 2 packages, and they would have also have been the Archbishop of Ireland packages of assisted immigration. And I would work with Ines Gersi both in the Octorard Heritage group, and then we also work with the Belmullet group, and I also work with the Foxford people, and I also work with some groups up in Achill. And Rosemary Gersi is in Belmullet, and she has done a lot of work on the ships manifests and the paperwork associated with them. And then we have linked all of this work down through the DNA. So what we do when we have worked on the traditional methods, and we have ascertained people's family trees and who they are connected with, we then encourage people to take DNA samples, and a number of people have paid for those DNA samples. For example, Terry Fitzgerald would be very interested in Gary family, the Leiden family, and she has followed up on a number of those. Jim Holleran, as I said, would have followed up on a number of people in the Mannion line and the Holleran line, and he too would have paid for a number of kits. We in the centre have paid for kits earlier, but we haven't done so much of it anymore, although there is a history course running at the moment, and some of the members of that we will be paying for the kits for those to be tested. And then we work with the Irish Centre in Portland, Maine, and Maureen Norris and Margaret Feeney-Lacombe would have been coming to the Connemara area for a number of years, as well as Carmen Dumond. And Deb Sullivan Gallerson works with the Clonbur area. And what has happened there basically is that we have searched out people to test. We have an idea who we're going for. We look for particular people in each family group. We look for the oldest members of the community, and we look for people who would know their parentage. And they would have, now their tests would have been primarily run with FTD, which is Family Tree DNA, and Family Tree DNA run 2 programs with the Portland, Maine Irish Centre, and one of those is the Connemara Gaeltacht project, and the other one is with the Aran Islands and Portland, Maine. For back in the day, Portland, Maine would have been the first port of call for a lot of ships going to America, and because the harbours and that froze in Canada and into St. John's, Portland, Maine was the first area where the harbour remained open in the winter and provided good work for immigrants. We also put out messages in newspapers, and we follow up on newspaper articles. Each year, the Irish Flower, which is an Irish language publication, it's in publication now for 31 years. It would have been one of the main instigators in identifying the reasoning behind having a physical place for people to come to. And that goes out each year, and it gets sent to people. Use it as a Christmas present. They send it to their families, and in that we publish social history of the area, as well as some family history related to the area. And in doing so, we identify families. One year we might take one family, the next year another family, and we work on their political connections or their social history in the area, or how they came to be in the area. I'd also be in contact with a number of Irish centres throughout America. And we're very influenced, of course, by EPIC, and would have visited and that. And I mean, we're much smaller on the west coast, but nonetheless, it's wonderful that such a place exists. And then, of course, Cove in County Cork, and of course the Dunbrody in Wexford, and that. And the heritage groups, we work with them in Octorara, Belmullet, Achill, Foxford, and it would be very remiss of me not to mention Barry Mannion of Galway County Council and the Heritage Office. That they have given us immense support, and through them we have done some townland projects. So all of West Galway has now had all its townlands searched through and documented, and we have worked then coming down from the Down survey down to the pension census and on into the two censuses of the earlier part of the century, the last century, sorry. And they have all been linked, hyperlinked together. And the man who does most of that work is actually from Cornwall, and his name is Roger Harrison. And then Dr. Gerard Moran would oversee a lot of the work that has been done on the two immigrant programs and any of the assisted immigrant programs. And Kathleen Villiers-Tuttle, of course, in Clifton, is a well-known historian who has also submitted and who also looks at the work and verifies it before we publish it or before we pass it on to anybody else. Locally, we have some very, very good historians, and those people such as Catherine Jennings. Now, I'm mentioning a lot of people here by name, but there is a reason for that. If anybody felt the reason to get back to us for any reason, we would be more than happy to help people. So my role and the role of the Immigrant Centre is when we connect with people who are looking to find family, we go about it, as I said before, in the traditional manner, but we do look at family trees, and we look at records. I have mapped the local graveyards myself, and I'm now currently involved in getting them digitally marked. We have a lot of local knowledge that we collect, and I have a lot of information on ships records. We encourage all people who contact us on family finding missions to take a DNA test. We find that Ancestry has the largest membership worldwide. FTD DNA work with the main Irish Heritage Centre, where the two programmes operate, as I said. And we do Noel Murphy, who not only manages, I should say, the Rossmuck page, he also works with the Mike Cullen area genealogy pages, and Lettermullen, Lettermore, and there's a number of others. And these areas may not seem, especially Lettermullen or Lettermore, you know, people may not be overly familiar with them in East Galway, but they're actually there's quite a large population in them. And so we have we set up our Facebook groups then, and we're all individuals, but we do refer back and over to each other and join them. So we have Facebook groups connecting those who have tested. And our experts in the field locally would be Noel Murphy, Rossmuck, with Peter Mannion, Jim Holloran in San Diego, Terry Fitzgerald in Seattle, and myself. I'm based in Clifton. That's where I live, but I work in South Connemara. We've experts who operate out of Portland, Maine, and St. Paul's, Minnesota. And I also have some people in St. John's, Newfoundland. And I do work with people who went on, as I said, as convicts on the ships. Some of our families, we're able to trace back families. What we also use the DNA for, we use it for proof for adoptees that they are who they believe they are, and we follow all the proper protocols, of course, with ensuring people adhere to the rules and regulation of GDPR. A lot of times when we have worked on a family tree, we do try to get a number of people to test so that we're sure that we're working with the right people. And we build up trees using DNA, which I find separates the generations very well. And I also find, as has been mentioned earlier, the value of having trees published on Ancestry or on any public forum means that you can go back and check the databases for that. You've seen some photographs there today that are very typically Connemara. I should also say that a lot of those photographs You're looking here at a photograph of a traditional boat, a Connemara hooker, and they would have travelled in and out to Galway to bring provisions, but they were also the means by which people travelled before roads, and a number of people would have, married more than a mile apart. They would have been marrying, and matches would have been made all along the route of those journeys, and you'll find people from Roundstone would have traditionally married out of it, say, into South Connemara and all along. So people were migrating as well amongst themselves. We do have in Dodgemy, not as much as could be expected, or would be expected, mostly because of that and because of people moving and so many people immigrating. In my own ancestry, you can see that I probably have more relatives in the American Eastern Seaboard than I do in Connemara, and that's saying a lot, because I have a lot of relatives in the Carna area, Clifton area, and Rossmuck. And I should also say that we'd have different types. We'd have people who would have been very poor on immigration, but we would also have, on my mother's father's line, he was quite well to do, and he actually had business here and in the States. And after Ireland was divided and after the rising, he actually exported his family. So I hope people have enjoyed this. I'm sorry I got off to a little bit of a shaky start. I'm very impressed with today, and I must say that Martin Curley does a great job. Good to see everybody on here, and fantastic to hear the stories.
Many thanks, Eileen, Guri Mila Mahagat, and that it said that too small lahanubber. A good start is half the work, but you made a kind of like a start there, and then you made a fantastic presentation. And I think we were looking at in East Galway, something similar to what you're doing there in Carna, to have a focal point for an immigrant centre and to do that. And I think having this, I just realized, apologies, I didn't have the video on. What you're doing there, Eileen, and the other people that you mentioned is fantastic work. It's really, really impressive, and a focal point for people to come to.
Yeah, I hope I didn't leave anybody out when I was mentioning, but it is the Facebook pages have been very, very good for us. And sometimes while I don't see people reacting maybe to something that's put up, they might contact me afterwards and say, this is who it is or whatever. And I have to say, it's really, this has been a lovely conference. The best I have attended now all year. And that's not to take away from, we have had one of our own, and Noel Murphy again, and Peter Mannion had one in Pierce's Cottage in Rossmuck, which was wonderful. But this one now kind of it's great to see that we can all belong to the one. Thank you.
Well, that's it. It's East and West in Galway. You mentioned there, my biggest surprise in my own DNA was to find so many Mannion cousins in Clifton and around the place, and still kind of
well, then we are related.
More than likely, Eileen, because my great granny was Mary Mannion from Ballymannion in Minla, O'Magnon. So I don't think you can get more Mannion than that. So it's quite good.
No, my great grandmother was Bridget Mannion, and her mother was Mary O'Toole from Omey Island. And not too sure how they met up, what they did, but that's our line. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm just looking here, tons of complimentary messages, Eileen. So thank you very much for that. Wonderful and great presentation. And so that is fantastic. And David Lohan is another Mannion as well there, and he has connections as well to Rossmuck. And I think Padre O'Magnon, who is wonderful resource for me in terms of the Mannions out there and everything else Mannion is on this as well. So thank you very much for that. So Mila Buigas, Eileen, thank you so much for that. And I just realized I'm going to just stop